The night still remains the silence that hung heavy on rural America, where the only sound is the rustling of leaves in the wind, and the occasional owl cry. At around 11 p.m., a gust of wind bit him as he stood outside and rolled a trash can onto the street. The sky was starless and covered in dense clouds, and the only light came from a distant balcony bulb, casting long, wavy shadows across the grass. I live in the rural South, where houses were scattered far and wide throughout the night. It seemed to swallow up the entire landscape. My husband goes to work and often comes home late, and that night was no different. I know he can pull it off any minute. Our semicircular driveway wraps around the back of the house, the kind that makes you feel free when you're alone in the dark, no matter how familiar it feels during the day. As I headed down the street into the first room, I heard the sound of a truck's engine in the distance. A low moan echoed from the trees. The silence echoed as a sign that the night was alive in a way I had never noticed before. His headlights were wide open as he pulled into the opposite side of the driveway. A beam of light cut through the darkness like a knife before he disappeared behind the house. I paused for a moment. Then he parked and locked his truck. As he walked to the back of the house, the dim light from his flashlight flickered in the distance. The air felt unusually cold for that time of year, and there is something unsettling about the silence. As I picked up the second trash can, my mind was racing. Something makes me feel uncomfortable. Still not scary at all, it's like an itch in the mind. A feeling that something was wrong but beyond what I could pinpoint. I started pushing the can down the driveway towards the street. The sound of plastic wheels scraping on gravel fills the silence. My footsteps felt louder than they should have, and every step seemed to reflect back to me as if watching and listening in the night. Then, when I got to the end of the driveway and put the can on the mooring, I saw its shadows beyond the reach of streetlights sitting on the side of the road, not moving, watching me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a few seconds I thought about what I was doing. It's just a shape. After all, probably yesterday, I thought, trying to convince myself. But there was something wrong with his situation. Too much stillness, very well thought out. I took a slow, shaky breath and turned and walked home. My eyes darted behind my shoulder after a few steps. The weather is getting colder. It was a stinging cold that seemed to penetrate my skin and sink deep into my bones. My legs feel heavy. The weight of the night pressed down on me. When he came back down halfway, I heard the faint rumbling of a car. The car's headlights swept across the road, briefly revealing a figure hidden in shadow. It's a dog, or at least it looks like a dog. His fur is lumpy. It was black and white and looked sick, and for a long time clinging to his body in patches, like running wildly. But there's something wrong. His standing style and unnatural hardness in his body. The way his eyes sparkled in the light, too intelligent, too aware. A chill ran down my spine. In this country, you sometimes see stray dogs, lost or abandoned animals, but this world is not like this. I walked, my heart pounded, and every few steps I looked back, half expected him to follow. But that doesn't move. It just watched without moving, its eyes following my every move. As I approached the house, I saw my husband standing at the back door. His face was lit by a soft light within. "Did you see that?" he asked. I yelled, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. He looked at me, then he went out into the street where the dog was still standing. His eyes narrowed and he nodded slowly. "Yes," I saw that he replied. He wouldn't know what it was, something about his tone, low, calm, but tense, sent a new wave of fear through me. My husband doesn't snore easily. In fact, I don't see him being too concerned. But the look in his eyes told me he felt it too. Something isn't right. Then before we leave the creature, then did something that sent a chilling wave of panic through my body. He turned his head slowly and deliberately and looked straight at us. His eyes were fixed on me, and I suddenly felt an overwhelming fear. Now there are no questions. This isn't just any stray dog. When it looks at us, the beast saw nothing. It seems to count as if it knows more than it should. Without warning, things began to move. At first it was slow, almost hesitant. Then he started charging fast and fast. The sound of his paws hitting the gravel was impossibly loud on the quiet night. My heart pounded in my chest. Adrenaline rushed through my body. "Run," I said. My husband exclaimed, grabbing my arm. We trudged home. My legs felt burnt from pushing harder than they ever had before. The cold wind bit my face as I walked up the stairs and slammed the door behind us. I locked it, my hands shaking, and we both stood there for a moment, gasping for breath, listening to the silence, nothing but our hearts pounding and the house creaking along. "Wind," what he asked. I started, but my voice disappeared. I don't know how to finish the sentence. My husband looked through the window. His face was pale and his eyes swept across the field. "It has passed," he whispered, although his voice did not soften. There was no movement at all, no trace of life. We didn't see it again that night. But something has changed. The house felt different. It was as if a shadow had passed by. Leaving behind a residual discomfort, the darkness outside the window seemed to grow heavier, as if waiting and watching. I couldn't shake the feeling of being marked. Choose anything. The next morning we searched the yard for any trace of the creature, and there were no footprints or footprints in the gravel. There was absolutely nothing to suggest anything. But I know what we saw. Their eyes twinkled in the dark, and the memory stayed with me long after the night had passed. Several weeks passed, and I try to forget the incident, but late at night when my husband isn't home and I'm alone, I will hear it again, the soft sound of paws on the gravel. Softly but clearly loud outside the window. Every time I looked, there was nothing, but the discomfort still remains, appears all the time, whispered in my heart. He stood there at the edge of the field, watching and waiting. Like before, I don't know how long it's been there. How long have you been staring back? I just know that this time it won't go away. Not until you get what you want. The way to nowhere, the highway felt the same way we did driving through the dry expanses of the New Mexico desert. The horizon is an endless line of dry land and bushes, and the sky slipped into eerie shadows at dusk. We lived somewhere between Denver and Albuquerque. My mother and I were returning from a weekend volleyball tournament. I was 16, and that trip, like many, was just another level in my exhausted teenage life. Driving can be easy. 6 hours later, I was home immediately. But that's how it always looked before it went wrong. We went into Las Vegas. No, it's not Las Vegas. It's like the last light disappearing behind the mesa. This is Las Vegas, New Mexico. Population approximately 13,000 people. Most are nothing more than a stopover between major cities. Isolation until you get to Santa Fe, but there's something about this city that feels ... off. It seemed to exist somewhere else, like the shadow of a place that should have disappeared long ago. "Let's go eat and get gas," Mom said in a flat, exhausted voice. We haven't stopped since 1 p.m., and hunger consumes us both. A Burger King neon sign blinks in the distance. Long, dull light distorted shadows on the cracked sidewalk. As we approached, we found that the place was hardly open. Inside, half the lights were extinguished, and the parking lot was empty, except for the elderly couple sitting in the far corner of the dining area, motionless. Their faces looked unusually still. Like a mannequin inside, a young man stood at the counter. His skin was pale and smooth, as if polished. His blonde gum cut emphasizes his facial features. Make him look fake like a plastic doll that someone forgot to dust off. Then he spoke a thick, distinct Russian accent that made me crawl. We are in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico, but he speaks accurately as tested by people studying English. My mother and I both had uncomfortable expressions on our faces. Not just an accent, but there was something in the way he carried himself, the way he looked directly at us too. His eyes scanned every movement, every word, and the air inside felt dense, as if it squeezed us until it was difficult to breathe. Just ... let's go eat, I muttered under my breath, trying to shake off the feeling crawling under my skin. As the man took our orders, another group came in. He turned to them and spoke fluent Spanish without missing a beat. No Russian accent words flow naturally. It was as if they had never spoken differently in their lives. There was no hesitation, no pause. It felt like we were actually watching a crash. As he cycled through the options in front of us, we grabbed our food and hurried outside. My heart was pounding for reasons I didn't quite understand. Even the air outside felt different now, heavier, the air clinging to you, clinging to your clothes, and filling your lungs with something invisible but tangible. As we walked back to the car, I felt it before I saw it. No one was watching us. There was a bald man riding a rusty bicycle across the parking lot. He walks barefoot, feet full of dirt, his skin stretched all the way to his bones, as if he hadn't eaten in weeks. Two small dogs surrounded his bicycle. Their movements were coordinated. The bejeweled eyes glowed red in the dim light. The man didn't blink, he didn't move. He just looked at us through the window of our car with those bloodshot eyes. His expression was as if he hadn't seen us at all. But the next thing was, "I'm sorry," Mom whispered, her voice tight with politeness, as if the words were protecting us from what had happened. We got into the car and walked a few feet to the gas station next door. By now I was nervous. Every sound became louder, the sound of gravel under the tires, the murmur of a distant highway, soft creak of a closed car door as a yellow school bus pulled up behind us. We pulled up to the gas station. It was 7 p.m., long before the school bus was due to depart. The bus was old, the paint was peeling, and the windows were dark. There were no children inside. There was only the driver, his sunken eyes and pale face as if carved from wax. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. He seemed completely oblivious to us. Glancing at something in the distance, I looked at my mother. She was tense and her steps quick as she fumbled with the gas pump, trying to speed up. That's when I noticed a group of elderly women at a nearby gas station. They laughed and poured gasoline on their cars and clothes like champagne. Smoke fills the air, was intense and overwhelming, making me dizzy. But the women weren't interested. They just laughed too loudly, echoing through the empty night. It doesn't feel right. These things were not done. "We need a charger," Mom suddenly said, breaking the eerie silence that had enveloped us. We both suddenly realized that our phones were almost dead, and the thought of being stranded on the dark, winding roads between Las Vegas and Santa Fe without a GPS was terrifying. We parked in front of a gas station. The building towered over us like a ruin from the past. The window was full of dirt, and the light within was dim and flickering. As we stepped out of the car, something caught my eye. There was a hiker sitting on the road a few feet away, and inside that walker was a baby. He sat completely still, his small body stiff. His eyes were fixed on us. There was no one around, not mother, not parents. Just a baby staring straight ahead like a doll being propped up for display. Suddenly the air became colder, and the warmth of the desert evaporated as a chill ran down my spine. My mother and I hurried into the store. Our footsteps echoed across the cracked tile floor. It was dusty, like it had been abandoned for many years, and has the smell of old wood. The handsome old lady treasurer, greeted us with a smile that was the only thing we encountered all night. Mom talking about the baby outside, she could barely hear the whisper. The cashier frowned and looked towards the window. "No children," she said softly. Her tone was something I couldn't make out. I turned around to look. She was right, the stroller was still there. But the baby was gone. Mom picked up a charger from a nearby shelf, her hand shaking slightly. Eager to get out, we rushed to the counter. But when the cashier pressed the charger, I noticed something strange. An apple sat on the counter. It is perfectly round. It sparkles in an unnatural way. It was as if it had been polished to an impossible shine. But his skin was an unnatural brown color. It was as if it faded from the inside out. I can't take my eyes off it. It was as if it were pulsing under the fluorescent light, as if it were still alive. "That's a cute shirt," the cashier said. Her voice immediately softened and became happy. I looked down. I was wearing a plain white t-shirt. There's nothing endearing about it. But her comment didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like a distraction. It was a way to distract myself from the growing sense of unfairness that surrounded us. We got out of the store and got into the car. The engine roared loudly as Mom sped out of the parking lot. This city eclipses us. The dark road is closed. It is as if the landscape is trying to hold us back. I'm fiddling with the radio. Try to turn on the music, but the songs skipped and distorted. And getting louder and louder every second that passes until we cross the city limits, the music finally played clearly. The road stretched out before us, empty and dark. The vast desert swallowed up everything in our path as we drove silently. A night that presses on us from every direction. But even as the lights of Las Vegas fade into the distance, curious, I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't really go in. Weeks later, out of curiosity, I searched for this city online, and I met local people. Legend story of the missing person in the Las Vegas, New Mexico bus accident. A family disappears from a fast food parking lot. An unresolved mystery that fades from the headlines but never disappears from the city's collective memory. I scroll through old stories. The eerie details echo the strange events we witnessed that night. Then I got a photo. It was a blurry image of a young man with blonde gums standing behind the counter,